Welcome everyone to my YouTube channel. This is International Master William Paschall. We are playing as Sparkle Horse on lichess.org, and today's video is a review of some Simul games that I played this past week, November 11th. We play 25 players at a time on lichess, and the time control is 40 minutes with a 40-second increment. We're going to take a look at a couple of the more interesting games I found from the Simul. So, without further ado, the first one is against this player from Poland, Pilot 100. I don't like to favor one player or another, but this is actually the second game of his against me that I featured here in a Simul review. But I found it to be one of the more exciting and interesting games from the event, so I thought we could benefit from it. So Pilot 100 plays e4, and I played e5, double king pawn. Mostly I'm playing Sicilian defense, but I like to kind of mix it up and play different stuff to make it more fun. My opponent played knight f3, and I did remember that we had played a Spanish game or Roy Lopez previously, so I was kind of anticipating a good game here. I played knight to c6. We have bishop b5, much more positional than the Joko piano with bishop to c4. a6, bishop a4, and now knight to f6. And with this move, we're going to the main line of the Spanish. White has a lot of options, of course. He plays the standard move, castles kingside, which would allow me to play the open variation. An exciting and sharp variation favored by the late great Victor Korchnoi. So instead, I go into the main lines with bishop e7. And here white plays now rook e1. And now that this pawn on e4 is protected, white is actually threatening to win a pawn by bishop takes c6, followed by knight takes e5. So at this point you have to do something to defend the e5 pawn. b5 is the main move, and now bishop to b3. And here we have two choices. If you intend to play the Marshall Gambit, you have to play castles here, followed by d5 after the move c3. I don't know the theory of the Marshall. I want to learn how to play closed Spanish, so I played d6. Actually, I did castle here, sorry, I did castle, but I'm intending to play d6. c3 now, d6, and white has h3. h3 stops bishop g4. This is a move that can put pressure on the d4 point indirectly by pinning the knight in f3. Another interesting variation for white after d6 is d4, and if d4, bishop g4, white can protect the center with the move bishop e3. This is another very interesting critical main variation of the closed Spanish, but the majority of players prefer to play simpler h3. Now we have bishop b7. Black has a lot of moves here. Knight a5. The Chigorin variation is going through a resurgence at this time. And we can also play the Breyer variation, knight b8, knight to d7, strong point variation. So black has a lot of choices in this closed position. I play Karpov's favorite variation, bishop to b7, the Zaitsev. Now d4, and the main line with rook e8. White continues to maintain the center, knight to d2. I should mention the variation knight to g5. We have faced this in the stream. After knight g5, you have to go back with rook f8. And technically, most players would repeat moves in this position, but there is the interesting possibility of f4. And if f4, we've gone to some of these positions in my stream, in my blitz stream, we've had some games with e takes f4, bishop takes f4, and now knight a5. This seems to equalize for black. Knight a5, and there was one game I saw with knight d2. This was played by Vallejo against Caruana to make a draw, which is very interesting. But after bishop c2, black seems to get a pretty good game with a standard move here, knight d5. This trick, trading pieces, and black tends to equalize. But anyway, it's interesting to just keep in mind that white has that ability to play knight g5 and f4 there. The line is probably kind of a draw by force, more or less. So, but interesting to note that Vallejo did use that against Caruana to make a draw. A little bit of a surprise, perhaps, for black. Knight bd2, and now black has many moves, but only one really reliable move, bishop f8, overprotecting the strong point In the event of knight g5, we can play rook e7, which is much better. Now he plays an unusual move, but not a bad move. Most players play a4, a3 here. He closes the center with d5. And this is the line that I probably know the least. So in this position, black is supposed to play, by theory, knight to b8. The idea with knight b8 is that the piece doesn't really get in the way of the other pieces. The knight can go back to b8 as in the Breyer variation and recirculate toward the center with knight on bd7. You can see that knight e7, knight a5 are played. I played knight e7. I didn't remember the theory really well, but I did recall liking this move fundamentally because the knight moves toward the king's side. But on the other side of the board, white may get an advantage if he's able to play a4 and isolate my pawn. So we followed some rather obscure theory here, knight f1 and then c6. This is an unusual move. In fact, it may not be bad, but most players have played knight to g6 in this position. And there have been some games with the move h6, stopping ideas of bishop g5. For example, h6 followed by knight g6. We don't have to worry about knight g6. Bishop g5. But I don't see any problem with the idea of c6. It looks like a playable move. And now bishop g5 would have been the sharpest move for white. Bishop g5, threatening to double my pawns. And then I probably would be safest playing knight to g6 here, as was played in at least one game. Knight g6. Ironically, another Vallejo Fabiano Caruana game. This was actually played in a game, but interesting would be to allow the double pawns with pawn takes pawn. It's never been tried before. So pawn takes pawn, bishop takes f6, g takes f6, a little bit like a Sveshnikov type of position. But I think the double pawns are quite risky for black, but interesting. The bishop may get into play by h6 or g7, so this would be worth investigating, although definitely dangerous. So if we go back, we can see like h6. This is the move that stops bishop g5. Probably a safer bet, or knight to g6. I go c6. He could have played bishop g5, but as I said, it's a pretty obscure position, so white can be forgiven for not knowing the theory here. He plays instead d takes c, and then we're following one very rare game. I don't know these players. Lai Mo versus Enchev. I have no idea if these are over-the-board players or like correspondence players. Sometimes there's correspondence games in the database on the site here, so it could be either. It looks like now I've got pretty good play. Bishop takes, pressure on the e4 pawn, and white reinforces that now with knight to g3. But generally speaking, that's the plan for black. When white plays d5 early, we want to chip away with c6. Maybe it wasn't at the right time. He could have played bishop g5, but we had the right kind of idea for black. So h6 stopping bishop g5 now, and I'm aware that that's a concept. And we transpose actually to a game, Kaido Kulats versus Bluknorius. Strong Estonian Grandmaster Kulats against the Polish IM. Or no, I think he's not Polish, but also Lithuanian. Lithuanian against Estonia, I guess. Kulats, Bluknorius. Knight h2 is possible there. He played instead knight to h4. Complicated position. This plan of knight h2 to possibly play queen f3, maybe knight to g4, is a little more aggressive looking. We do follow the Kulats game though, with knight h4, and he's a strong player. It's a grandmaster, an established grandmaster, the strongest of the three players in the games we see here. Played knight h4. Then I break the center with d5, and now white could keep a little bit, keep the position like Kulats did with queen f3. I don't know if this is a good move or not, but it seems like somewhat logical. However, white's play is also okay here. After d5, he plays e takes d, but I do break out. So it's kind of like the Sicilian defense. When you achieve d5, you're equalizing. Knight on e takes d5. I think the position is approximately equal now. White has to be careful not to be worse. He played knight f5. No real tactics here. no threats of sacrifices per se, and I think black has a good game after knight f4. Bearing down on g2. We have bishop takes f4, giving up this bishop. It's unfortunate for white to have to give up that bishop. This is not really what he wants to do. But my pawn gets misplaced. I lose my central strong point. Perhaps white could have played a solid move here. You have queen c2, just kind of maintaining the position. But who could imagine that it would be possible to sacrifice this pawn on g2? It looks very, very strange to do that. So I would imagine that this is the natural move. Bishop takes f4, e takes f4, and now knight e2. And this is where it looks like black has an advantage. My idea was to tear up white's position on the king side with the move f3. But then I realized that we have some tactical problems because the white knight, or one of the white knights, can go to f3, preferably the e2 knight. So if I try to play my plan, which was to play f3 to break up his king side, first of all, he can just trade queens. Trading queens and then playing knight d4. But it's certainly fine to play knight to d4, forking my bishop on c6 and the pawn on f3. And I think after that, it's doubtful, really. If I have to give up my white square bishop to double his pawns, it's doubtful I have an advantage. For example, like rook takes e1, queen takes e1. I have to move my bishop away somewhere. Bishop b7, bishop d7. Both are interesting. Maybe even bishop e4. Let's just say bishop b7, for argument's sake here. Now white has a shot here tactically. Bishop takes f7 check. Did not see that. So apparently I have to keep that guarded. So bishop e4 or bishop d7. I never would have seen this in a fast Simul game, but it doesn't appear that convincing that black has any advantage here. So the basic premise was that f3 was the plan, but it wasn't the best move. And so I played a different move here. I played bishop e4. This was actually not a bad move. It wasn't my initial plan, but I saw that f3 crosses my plan. Queen c7, it turns out, would have been the simplest and the strongest. Guarding f7, defending the pawn here on f4, with a slightly better position for black. I'm ready to bring my rook to the center. So I did not notice that in time. Bishop e4, though, my move was good enough. And now white has to move back, and I thought, okay, now I play f3. But objectively, I don't think this was really a great move. Here, we should probably keep the tension. Just defend my pawn on f4. Even g5 is possible, though it's very weakening. What I did, I think, is kind of give away my advantage with the move f3. I honestly don't see anything wrong with knight takes f3, for example. Knight takes f3, bishop takes f3. He could trade queens. Queen takes d8. Rook takes d8. G takes f3. And even in such a position, I don't think that black has very much. Maybe a tiny advantage after rook d2. I don't think that I would have had that big of an advantage. Maximum, I win this pawn at b2, but it seems like white will have some counterplay. So he has a better pawn structure. It's probably not enough for me to win here. So in the game, I think I wanted to try to avoid that scenario. But he took with a pawn. I played bishop b7. So this was risky. This was a very bad move to take with a pawn here. I think to take with a pawn on f3. You don't want your king side to be broken open in a position where the queens are on the board. If the queens were traded, it's no problem. Bishop b7. Now black has great compensation for the sacrificed pawn. The computer still likes white because white is a pawn ahead here. But I think in terms of playability, I would prefer black here. The two bishops, better pawn structure, danger to the white king. Even the computer starts to admit that, the Stockfish engine starts to admit that white has a slight disadvantage. Knight f4, this was a reckless move. Queen c7, now I'm almost completely developed. And then knight e6, and white goes for a crazy tactic here, which I completely spaced on. So when I'm playing 25 boards, Often tactically, I don't have time to calculate all the ramifications, or I get confused very easily, but this was a crazy, crazy sacrifice by white. He should simply make some sort of defensive move, knight d3 or queen d2, even trading rooks. I wouldn't want to trade rooks necessarily. And the computer finds an interesting move here, knight g6. The problem is the knight is unstable at g6. He can play knight g6, but should I move my bishop somewhere like bishop d6 or bishop c5? The knight is simply hanging on g6 in a very precarious way, so I don't know that that's a really safe plan. Knight d3, something solid. Instead he played knight e6, and for some reason after I took and he took, in this position, I could simply just sacrifice the exchange on e6. I mean, I won a piece, so obviously I can afford to give material back. But for an unbeknownst reason, I had a hallucination here, and I thought, or forgot, that I could just simply take on e6. So I was like, well, where can I move my queen that he doesn't have a discovery? And I realized that if I play queen b6, it happens that he doesn't have a powerful discovery in this position. So, not the greatest move, but there is no really, really big problem. It turns out there is a computer-like move here. Rather than going for material, he could have maybe forced to draw a repetition or something. With knight f4 check, king h8. It has the feel of something that looks like he might be able to force a draw by repetition. And then queen d3, threatening knight g6 with nasty ideas. So big mistake playing queen b6 for me. In time pressure, I could simply chop the knight, play queen b6, and then he goes for the exchange, which is fine by me. That's what should have happened in the main line anyway. I should have given up the exchange here, and that's exactly what he made me do. And it's actually good because I trade pieces into an ending where I'm winning. Maybe I could consider taking with a knight, but I wanted to trade off his powerful rook. Rook takes, and then queen d3. I thought maybe he would exchange on e8, driving my knight back. So here, we now played rook d8. My rook now becomes very powerful on the files. I've got two powerful bishops, and very good position. Queen f5, and I was worried about the back rank, but the knight is doing everything. It's defending g8, it's defending h7, it's defending e8. So going for the throat would have been the proper recipe here with rook d2. But instead, I became nervous with very little time, like 5 seconds per move, basically. I have to make my moves at the stage. I wanted to find a safe move, so instead I tried to kind of force a trade of queens with this mating idea on this diagonal. The idea to play queen takes f3 and win a pawn and trade queens and eliminate any kind of counterplay. Rook d2 would have been far stronger. And then he defends with rook e3, but we've got a tempo with bishop c5, so still very, very good game for black. Probably just winning. And then rook e6, queen takes f3. He has to trade queens to the mating threats, and this is a position that technically should be winning. But in time pressure, things are not so easy. He found this move, the stabilizing move, rook e5, which doesn't give me time to play rook d2. If he goes grabbing material with rook takes a6, I'm going to play rook d2 very powerfully, which is winning by force. So this has been a game with quite a few mistakes from both sides, but rook e5 was a good move to find for white in my time pressure, and I decided to take a risk here with knight e4. Turns out to be a slight mistake, but in very bad time pressure, it was hard to find the best move. I wanted to be as active as possible. Apparently, he has a couple of good moves here, bishop c2 or rook f5, kind of unplugging my bishop on f3. If for example, rook f5, I'm a little worried. According to the engine, white is probably okay here. So rook f1 now and rook d2. Again, I'm winning. Then I had another strange hallucination in this position, which was happening to me quite a bit. A good defensive move, bishop d5, best try, and then I find knight g5. And then for some reason, in this position, I didn't realize how strong my move really was. He should play rook check, and then trade bishops on f3, I guess. The best line is rook e8 check, king h7, bishop takes f3, knight takes f3 check, and king g2, I suppose. When it looks like black is close to winning, but it's not that easy to convert this. We're not up that much material, and honestly, my pieces are a little tricky to coordinate, so he would have had some practical chances here. In the actual game, a very strange thing happened. We made mutual blunders, so he played rook takes g5, and in this position, I'm simply winning, I think pretty easily, if I take on d5 with a bishop. These bishops are, okay, there's still some practical hope for white. You know, he almost has enough material, but it's just such a powerful bishop pair. It's probably fairly routine for white to win this, black to win this position. But instead I had a hallucination, and I just took back the rook, and this is a dead draw. H takes g5, bishop takes f3. It was an entertaining game, but a lot of mutual mistakes in a complicated position. It's hard to play 25 games at the same time. Easier to play kind of technical lines. This sort of complex openings like the Sicilian, the Spanish, it's definitely not easy for the Simul giver or his opponents. So we go into this technical ending. This is all a draw. Basically, he loses a pawn, but it's too difficult for black to make progress here. King g2, and then g6. I was a little worried about my king. I mean, perhaps I should try to snack this pawn here on c3, but he's going to have some counterplay with his bishop on the white squares, mating threats on the back rank and stuff like that. So I decided to make sure my king was free, and he sacrifices a pawn here for active king. King g4, king h6, and then g4. I think this is all a draw. Takes g4, rook takes f4, rook takes c3. I'm up a symbolic pawn, but he has pretty active pieces here, so I'm confident that this is. Here he missed rook takes g6 check. It was strange. I actually saw it, but I didn't bother to prevent it because I didn't see anything better. So he plays bishop e4, and I maintain an extra pawn, but this is a dead draw in position with the opposite color bishop, so I simply offered a draw here after bishop c5. So very back and forth game. Interesting line. Let's go on, guys, to our second game. This was really a fun game. I think more so for my opponent than for me. We're playing white against a guy I've never played before here on lichess, Narithus, who I believe he was from Germany. I think he played the opening extremely well. We're white, we played c4, knight f6, looking for some kind of transposition to an Indian defense. I played knight to c3. I like to play against, like, for example, e6 with the floor Mykonos variation e4. Very few people give that to you, though. You play g6, looking for King's Indian and Grunfeld, and I just decided, okay, I don't really feel like playing a kind of quiet English. I wanted to play something interesting, so we just let him transpose to King's Indian or Grunfeld, and he doesn't go for Grunfeld. With bishop g7, played e4, it's a King's Indian now, d6, and then f3. My old standby, the same-ish variation with f3. Now, black castles, and then bishop e3, bishop to g5. I sometimes play bishop e3, but more often I play bishop to g5. This is sort of a favorite variation for me. And I also play another variation with bishop g5 in the King's Indian, the Smyslov system. So I'm kind of comfortable with lines. Also the Petrosian I played with bishop on g5. Lines with bishop g5 tend to slow black's kingside play down and often invite Benoni-type positions. So I think players who are white and don't want to go into a King's Indian where they're getting attacked on the king side, we can recommend pretty much all the lines where white plays bishop g5 in the King's Indian sort of preempt black from a king side oriented attack. So c5, d5, and if my bishop were on e3, I could keep the tension here with knight on g2. But with the bishop on g5, we can't really do that. Play d5, now h6. This is actually a perfectly good move. See here a game, Magnus Carlsen versus Anarchia from 2014. There's an important finesse here. Black played a6. E6 is also common. So a6, queen d2, and then e6. This is a very important tactical finesse. And black has to be pretty knowledgeable in the King's Indian to know this idea. The idea basically that if I take on h6, black is taking on d5 and so on. So let's take a look. If I play bishop takes h6 in this position. Oh, I can't. He played e takes d already. Okay, so e takes d. This is the game. We don't have time to take on h6. We have to take back with a c pawn. And now he just plays h5. There is another line where black hasn't played a6 yet. And I can actually take on h6 and knight takes e4 and queen h4 check, winning back the bishop on h6. So we can't win that pawn on h6. If you're black in the King's Indian, you never, in the same, you never want to put your king on h7 unless you have to. It's usually better to play something like h5. Now knight on g to e2, knight on b d7, and then knight c1. This is the main line for this variation. So Narathas knows what he's doing. I don't know how strong a player he is, but we are in the kind of main line. And I've never been a big fan of playing with my knight on c1. But in the lines where black's played h5 so early, knight g3, h4 just doesn't make sense. So I have to play a bit passively with my knight on c1. I play bishop to e2, then knight h7. This is main line of this particular variation. And now knight h7, castles, f5. We have rook b1. And this is apparently a new move, and maybe not a good move by me, but I was unsure about the theory here. So at this point, I felt the position was very tricky. We could play f4. We could play f4 in this position and challenge the knight, but then he plays knight g4. So some interesting line like f4. I thought knight g4. Apparently knight f7 is more commonly played. In fact, I had almost the same exact position with black a few weeks ago against Tot Erwin. And slightly different position. But e5, sacrificing a pawn temporarily, maybe d takes e5. This is very complicated. Bishop takes c5. And honestly, black might be able to sacrifice the exchange in this type of position with something like e takes f4. That looks like it was played in one game. Safest is rook e8, and according to the engine, black has a slight advantage. Black scored well here. So I don't know. You know, it's a very difficult sharp position. I played for black and white. f4 feels very risky to me. That's why I played rook to b1. Apparently, knight on 1 to a2 has been played, but the score isn't great for white in all variations. Rook b1, bishop d7. This is a very solid move. Black could exchange on e4. I'm not sure that it really achieves anything special. I might take with a knight. If f takes e4, knight takes e4. Played bishop d7. I thought, okay, now I've got b4. I'm destroying his strong pawn, or trying to destroy his strong pawn on c5. He played very well. b6, not giving it up. Play b takes c, and you know there are still possibilities of f4. Again, I feel it's risky, so I invaded on the 7th, and black defended this. I just thought I was getting a little bit of initiative. Black defended really well. After rook b7, brings the knight back in the center. This is the #1 move according to Stockfish. That piece is his worst piece. He could also play queen c8, which he played a little bit later on. But I really kind of like this move, knight f6, getting the knight back in the game. And I didn't know what to do here. This is a bit of a quandary. So I played h3, controlling the g4 square. I thought this is a sound move. Logical. I has all these pieces that can access g4. It does slightly weaken my king side, but I think thus far the game has been very well played by both sides. Pretty much correct play. And then queen c8, and here I played rook b6, and now queen c7. And here, maybe we have like the critical position, because I considered a5, but I felt that he can uproot my rook in any case with rook to b8. It's just too dangerous to play queen b2 for white to try to protect the rook on b6. To put my queen on the diagonal of the bishop on g7, if I need to protect my rook again, it's just too dangerous. So maybe the best move was simply retreating, but I was getting very low on time, so I decided to simplify here with rook takes a6. And it looks like this is slightly better for black. He gets quite an initiative. Rook takes a6, bishop takes a6, and my pieces lose some coordination. Queen a5, and I have to be careful. If bishops are traded, he might have knight to c4. So I played bishop b5 with the idea of bishop takes b5 and knight takes b5. I don't want to see knight to c4, forking my queen and valuable dark square bishop. So it's pretty much forced. I thought this was probably the best played game by both sides in my Simul on Sunday in terms of like correct play by both sides, which is what I'm really looking for. There is some theater value in some of the more exciting games. We'll see that later, but really in terms of a good game, a correct game, I thought this was well played by both sides. He takes the pawn here, and I snapped the pawn on d6, also guarding against the threat of knight c4. And things look about equal here. Pawn takes e4, pawn takes e4, knight takes e4. Now I trade rooks, which is good. It drives one of his pieces into a worse position, basically. Bishop takes f8. It's nice to see the bishop off the long diagonal. Knight takes e4. And so finally this position, when it looks like black has a somewhat dangerous pawn, but so do I. We both have dangerous passed pawns. This should be about equal. The engine likes black a little bit here, I guess, because his queen and knight are so brutally well centralized, but it shouldn't really be enough for black to win. So I was able to hold on. Bishop f2, a good defensive move. Avoiding the fork, knight c4. And he plays passively. This was, I guess, a bad move. He should have played bishop d6. There was a recent game where Boris Gelfand lost with white against Anish Giri in a King's Indian. Same kind of thing, just more pieces on the board. Giri was black and centralized all of his pieces in this very powerful kind of way, and that's what black tries to do here with maybe bishop d6. But objectively, still white should hang on. So knight d7 was his mistake, giving up his advantage, small advantage, and then we kind of reached a dynamic equilibrium. I blockade the pawn, he blockades mine, and now mine starts running, but it's not enough. He blockades again, bishop g3, queen d4, trading queens, and this ending is a draw. It should be a draw. Both pawns are vulnerable, and what ends up happening, really what should end up happening, is that both pawns kind of fall. So the kings approach the center, and we reach this sort of funny position, this geometric position. I'm able to chase his king around and actually win the pawn on d4. It's not enough, though. There's just not enough pawns on the board to win this game. Bishop f6, knight takes d4 check. His king is monstrously good, and I'm ultimately probably going to lose that pawn on d6. Knight f3, knight c5 check, king e3, and he's able to surround the pawn. Excuse me here. He's able to surround the pawn with knight e6, and I throw in d7, knight c5, and I can't save the pawn. So we reach a knight ending. It's a draw. I win a pawn, but there's not enough pawns left on the board here. After king f4, knight h7, knight g5, knight f6, knight f7, king e6, knight h8. I actually win the pawn on g6, but it's not enough. Knight check. I have to go to g5 to keep his king away from the pawn. Then he attacks my pawn. So I play g3, and now I should play g4 here, I suppose, and it would be h takes g, knight e3, and he sacrifices his knight for the last pawn. But I played it a little differently, trying to find a trick here. This is a theoretical draw according to table base, and king and rook pawn against king is a dead draw. He's got a clear draw no matter what I play here. My king will get stalemated in the corner, best case scenario. So it is a draw. Good game, Narathos. So the next game was an interesting one. This a lower rated opponent. Both my first two opponents were expert or candidate master type rating, 2100 or so. My next opponent, Andrea, is I think around 1700 on lichess, and he's struggled against me, but he's been improving. I played e4, I played e5 again, and then knight f3, and this time I decided to play the Petrov for Russian defense, for something different. White responds. Of course, the critical move is knight takes e5, or possibly d4. But on Sunday, my opponent played knight c3, and the four knights is is a position I don't know the theory that well in. So when I have played the Petrov defense, I have played bishop to b4. This avoids the symmetry of the four knights. And here the main line is knight takes e5, I believe. Knight takes e5 castles, and black temporarily sacrifices a pawn. You can also play knight takes e5, queen e7, followed by bishop takes c3 and knight takes e4. Black gives up the bishop pair and has a very tiny disadvantage in those lines. So for example, knight takes e5. You see here, main line, castles, and the other alternative, queen e7, which will win back the pawn by force in most lines. So that's the critical main line, but we see now d3, a very passive kind of Steinitz type defense. Still, white is white and has an extra move, so there's no reason he doesn't have the option to play like he's black, basically. I played sharply with d5 here, and mostly we would see pawn takes pawn here, queen takes d5, bishop d2, or maybe bishop d2. But Andrea played an interesting move. This is actually, according to the engine, an interesting move, a3. And it's non-existent in theory. I thought this is actually not so bad for white. Bishop takes c3 check, b takes c, and now I could simply play knight c6. I guess this is the best move, which will transpose to kind of like a reversed Steinitz type of thing. After knight to c6, we transpose back into some obscure theory like pawn takes pawn, or even knight d2 is an interesting option for white, overprotecting the strong point. I think that's a reversed Steinitz defense, so that's interesting. But I should have probably played that. Instead, I took here on e4, when I realized that suddenly white's position wasn't too bad. Knight takes e5, and I think he's probably still equal here, objectively. I castled, and then white played the move d4. That's a good move, kind of closing it up, not letting me exploit my chances on the open file. White has the bishop pair, which at the moment there are a lot of pawns on the board, but as we know, in the two knights, sometimes that bishop pair can be very powerful long term. So here I got very adventurous. I played knight to d5. I was afraid this might be a mistake, but it turns out it may be the best move for black. So not a theoretical position. I think most people would have challenged the knight on e5 with a standard move, knight on bd7, which is about equal. But I decided to be adventurous with knight d5, and this is really cool. He's better off probably playing bishop d2. And the position is actually kind of a mirror image of the two knights with colors reversed. He could play bishop d2, just a solid move, intending to retreat the knight back by a c4 or even g4 if it's attacked. So I think this would have been very solid for him. Instead, c4. This is a risky move. Not altogether bad, but giving me some chances to get counterplay against the central pawn on d4. Not the most flexible. c4, knight e7, and white makes a very, very bad error here. So he played c5, which is dangerous, the fact that white is wasting so much time in this position, I think. c5, and then f6. And suddenly the white knight desperately has to move in this position. Bishop c4 check. Now I must interpose the knight on d5. And then white makes an unthinkable mistake here. He has taken away one of the squares for his knight, but he has only one move. He has to play it. It's forced knight to g4, and the position is still about equal. I don't really know, who's better here. Maybe king h8. I could even trade the knight. Bishop e6, knight to c6. There's a lot of possible moves, but an unthinkable mistake. I don't know why he decided to play bishop takes d5 check, but the tragic Result of this is that white loses a piece. And now I normally wouldn't share this game on my stream review, but I did decide to do so because later on things get very, very complicated. He decided to sacrifice a piece here. It wasn't necessary. He could have played knight to g4. This exchange was not forced, and knight g4 could have been played when it looks like black is better, but not necessarily winning. I don't really like white's game. I could play queen c4, just win the pawn at d4 with bishop takes g4, queen takes d4. So it's not good. It's probably losing for white, no matter what he does. He decided to sacrifice a piece here. He played c4, and I'm not sure if he saw it, though. Probably didn't see. I have queen e6 and taking away his retreat on g4. So now he's losing a piece. The reason I shared this game, though, is I thought that actually Andrea made a good KG kind of attempt to save the game. He didn't give up, even though he had to lose a piece, and almost created, and in fact did create, real counter chances for himself in an absolutely lost position. Castles. Pawn takes e5. I'm up a piece here. But now white starts to play well. Plays d5. This is a very dangerous pawn formation, very powerful, controlling a lot of squares, bottling up my pieces. And I should have played queen to g6. Because queen to g6, it's very mobile. It has threats against g2. It protects the pawn on e4. But most importantly, besides just threatening the devastating bishop h3, it doesn't get in that piece's way. So it doesn't get in the way of the bishop on c8. Queen g4, I was trying to trade queens, but it's very badly placed. It's in a position where it can be attacked. It inhibits my movement of my bishop on c8. Very bad. Good job by Andrea. I've talked a lot about this on my stream. He does not trade pieces. It's a mobile square. He protects laterally against threats. So now, king h8 was a little bit paranoid. I saw the kings on the diagonal with the queen on b3. Probably I should develop with something like knight to a6. But instead, king h8 and f4. This was a really amazing move. Maybe objectively not good, but I decided to take on f4. I didn't see the point. And it's such a cute tactic. I should have taken en passant on f3. After the en passant capture, I'm just winning. But it was a nice try here. I didn't pay attention. I thought he's just giving me a pawn. It's crazy. But he has the shot. Rook takes f4. Now, maybe he should play bishop takes f4 in this position. But the problem there, yeah, it doesn't matter. Maybe bishop. So I think that's one little mistake. Instead of trading rooks, Andrea should play bishop takes. Same idea, rook takes, bishop takes, and I suddenly realized to my horror that I can't take on f4 because of rook f1. Rook f1 with a back rank mate on f8. And suddenly, my pieces are all undeveloped. Rook on a8, knight on b8, bishop on c8, everything's undeveloped. White's pieces, though he has less of them, one less piece, are all in play and very, very powerful. Also, the pawn, this pawn triangle here is very dangerous, very powerful, controlling a lot of squares. Could potentially queen a pawn, like the d pawn or the c pawn. So suddenly Andrea found a way to make this an interesting game. I played knight a6. I started to be terrified about back rank problems. And then rook f1, creating horrific tactical threats on the back rank. And now, again, I was kind of afraid of ghosts, but after knight takes c5, I'm concerned about, for example, like queen b5, threatening mate here, hitting my knight, and I wasn't sure, what I'm supposed to do. If, for example, knight takes c5, queen to b5, he has other moves as well. I have knight d7, I guess. But this is kind of an awkward move. I wasn't confident, that I'm not bottling up my remaining pieces here. So it was a bit awkward. He had almost a chance, and he does have a chance a little later on now. h6, creating luft for my king on the white squares. And then he goes crazy with bishop takes h6. When I should probably just take this piece, but it was kind of like, well, I'm undeveloped. if I take the piece, he might have some checks. I was very badly in time pressure here. So I should objectively take it and move my king over to g8, and I'm winning. I thought, okay, we'll just develop a piece instead with bishop f5. I can afford to lose a pawn, and then intermezzo, bishop takes g7. Not necessary. He has queen takes b7 here, and suddenly some sort of counter chance. I'm probably still winning after rook b8, but I thought this was the best try. Instead, bishop takes g7 check, king takes g7, and now queen to b2 check, king up, king g6, queen takes b7. And in this position, I thought, well, I'm just totally winning. I'm up 2 pieces. It has to be, a walk in the park. But if I play rook b8, he plays queen takes a6 check, and my king has to move again. There's some danger. Instead, I played the logical move rook f8. And now queen takes a6 check. And apparently, I should have walked my king up to h5. But this move is impossible for a human being to find without a lot of time. The whole idea of playing rook f8 was to interpose my rook on f6 with gain of time. So king h5 was a move I never would find. And apparently this is a serious blunder. I played rook f6, and in this position, according to the chess engine, he's in the game. White is materially okay. He has 6 pawns for a bishop and 3 pawns. So materially, it's about equal. It looks like white has real chances to save the game if he makes a good move here. But instead, he played c6, which left his queen terribly out of play. So any kind of move that would have brought his queen back in the game, like queen b5, queen a4, some kind of queen move to bring the queen back to defend. But instead, Andrea played c6. It's just too slow, and the queen is left out of play. This actually cuts off his own queens from play. Maybe he was thinking he's going to take on a7, and get it back in play that way. But it's just too slow. So e3, I realized this passed pawn is brutally strong, and I'm winning now. Queen takes a7, I guess this was the plan, but e2 is just too fast. It's just too fast, and I have bishop e3, and suddenly white is lost. It doesn't really matter where he goes, because in any rook move I'm going bishop d3, and the threat is rook f1. There is no defense. He gives up his queen, and it's game over. Rook takes f4, king takes f2, queen f4 check. With forced win, queen f1. So, not a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought an interesting fighting game that goes to show that, even a player who's lost can hang in there and really find some moves to stay in the game. I thought it was a very, very good fighting game by Andrea, and he made it as interesting as it could be. And even at the end, after all the mistakes we made in that game, he could have saved it possibly with queen b5 or queen a4, bringing the queen back in the game. So, messy game, but a fun game, and that's really why I wanted to put it in there. Finally, I thought one of the best games from Sunday, this game against Fresh Kid. He plays e4, and we're playing knight c6, trying to get some new stuff going on. I have played the Nimzovich quite a bit. We played knight f3, of course. d4 is the critical move. Knight f3, and I don't want to transpose. d6, and now d4 would be normal, but instead he played bishop c4. And if I play e5, it's a passive kind of opening for black. Passive classical opening. So knight f6, and then knight c3. And I don't really think it's justified to play knight takes e4 here so early after bishop takes f7. My king looks a little open. So bishop g4, h3, he played a3. This is not a bad move. The idea is to give the bishop retreat squares along diagonal. I mean, h3 is standard. d4 is even possible, with the idea of taking back with a pawn on g3. But this was a great game because Fresh Kid played creatively, I thought. h3, maybe it's not a great move, but interesting. So I played e6, not to transpose to a normal kind of double king pawn position. And then d3, bishop e7. Nothing exciting yet, but I realized when he played bishop e3 that white was seriously thinking about maybe castling queenside, and I didn't really, know how to react. You'll see what happens here. He played knight e5, forking the pin on f3 and the bishop on c4, and then bishop b3. Maybe better to play bishop a2. I'm not sure why he chose to play bishop to b3 rather than a2. It seems like that's the point of playing a3 here. So that was a little inaccurate. Black's slightly better here. a6 now. Why did I play this? I was looking at variations of playing c5. And because he decided to play bishop b3 instead of bishop a2, he has the ability to play bishop a4 check. And that's why I played a6, to meet bishop a4 check. And then rook g1. I thought this was really the coolest move of the game. And when this player played rook g1 against me, I thought, this guy, he's a creative player. This is a great idea. It's a really deep concept, to play rook g1 and say, look, if you take on f3, I'm always going to have some kind of play. I think this is a brilliant, creative idea for white, really. This is genius. Rook g1, exclamation point. Not clear what I should do now. Now I have second thoughts about the entire position, because ultimately, what am I going to do? Maybe c5 would have been a rational thing to do, but I already wanted to make preparations for trading on f3 and defending my kingside. The computer doesn't like g6, but the reality is that I'm going to have a problem along the g file. I'm planning on very possibly castling queenside. Queen e2, and it looks like both sides may castle queenside. c5, bishop f4. Now, I didn't really understand bishop f4. The problem is that white can't really force my hand with h3 without losing a pawn there, but maybe he can play h3. Maybe he should play h3. And after h3, I would have played bishop takes f3 and retreated the knight back to c6. Bishop takes, pawn takes, probably preempted him with knight c6, heading for d4. Hoping to get good control of the dark squares, something like knight h5. It's an unclear position. I like black a little bit better. But instead, he doesn't play h3 and weaken his position. He plays bishop f4. I play knight fd7. Not a bad move. Queen e3 now, breaking the pin. And I have to trade. It's an awkward move. This is a strong move, and maybe that's his whole plan. Bishop f4 followed by queen e3, breaking the pin. Wasn't possible a few moves ago. Bishop takes f3. Otherwise, my bishop will get trapped if his knight moves away. Pawn takes f3. And now I like black structure. I played queen b6. I remember clearly my thinking during this game that I wanted to bear down on the d4 point, but why not knight to c6? First knight to c6, perhaps then queen b6 would have been better. Okay, I played queen b6, he played knight e2, now I play knight c6, transposition. And he's awkwardly placed with the bishop there. And then bishop h6, preventing me from castling when I have a host of good moves. Knight a5, which I didn't see. Bishop f6, which is strong. I guess at bishop f6, he can play rook to b1. But I blundered here with castles queenside. Blundered in the sense that I missed two strong moves. And now bishop g7, rook g8, and bishop back to c3. White's kind of coordinated now. And the biggest problem, which I failed to take into consideration, was that he's increased his control over d4. So if I had it to play over again, I probably would have played something like bishop f6 and tried to trade off the dark square bishop. When the position is, I think, a tiny bit better for black, but perhaps the computer engine doesn't agree. It's about equal. Instead, I blundered here. The problem was that a few moves earlier, I had superior control of d4. And just that I forgot playing a whole bunch of boards at the same time. that the d4 pawn wasn't protected enough. So a major blunder. But the game becomes very interesting when I'm a pawn down. Pawn takes, and his bishop is fairly bad. So the white square bishop, fairly restricted. So I thought I actually have legitimate chances to save the game here. Queen c7. Basically, Fresh Kid had to win the game a second time. c4. Not a bad move. The computer criticizes it, but I think it's perfectly reasonable. Maybe best to just castle. He needs to find safety. He was concerned about knight c5, but he can play bishop a2. c4 was a bad move. Weakening. Okay, I agree. Weakening the dark squares, making his bishop bad, and now bishop f6. Perhaps I should play knight to c5, blockading on the dark squares. Knight c5, e5, or e5 right away. That's what black should do. Set up a dark square blockade position when his white square bishop is bad. I wanted to trade the dark square bishop. Bishop takes, knight takes, rook c1. I don't know about that move. And then king there. Maybe I should play e5 straight away, but he's threatening c5. So I had to be very careful about my king. So we play king b8. And then I thought c5 was possible, but king e2. And then e5, trying to get a grip on the dark squares. And then c5, he doesn't let me. And suddenly I'm getting impaled down the c file. So white is clearly better. I could have played d5. That didn't occur to me during the game. This was maybe the best solution to kind of keep the lines closed. Instead, I took queen takes c5, and I end up losing a second pawn. Rook d7, queen takes, rook takes, king takes, bishop takes f7, and rook f8. Bishop b3, and now I have beautiful dark squares for my knight, but 2 pawns down. I want to show you all one position I missed. Knight h5, king e3, knight f4, bishop d1. Look how passive this white squared bishop is. And we had a long endgame, but a really, really interesting position arose here. After bishop e2, knight e6. I have enough compensation for 1 pawn in this position, but not really for 2. So it boils down to me being basically like 1 pawn of material down, which might be salvageable for black. Because his extra pawn, one of them is doubled, and his white square bishop is so bad, I felt like I should save this game. We had rook c1, knight d4, b4, g5. I'm trying to lock up the dark squares, get a bind on the position. a4, b6, getting the pawns on dark, and rook c4. And I was so sad because in the position soon to come up here, played a5, bishop d1. Maybe he should try this exchange sacrifice. Take, rook takes d4. Instead he plays bishop d1, played h6, plays h3, putting a pawn on the white square. That seems like a strange decision. Pawn takes pawn, rook takes pawn. And now, I missed it. This tactic, which probably would have saved the game. Rook takes f3. This is really a move that I should see. There's a 100% chance of me seeing this in a long game. But in a blitz game where I'm short of time, this was becoming like a blitz game, I missed it. That would have saved the game. Rook takes f3 check, bishop takes f3, knight c2 check. And his bishop is so bad after that that the game should be very possibly drawable. I'm not 100% sure. Let's see. Knight c2 check, king d2, knight takes b4. My king is awfully good here, coming to c5. This king is just awfully good on c5. I really don't see, with a good king and the white pawns, I don't think that white's winning. But instead, I didn't play it. I retreated my rook here. And he makes a brilliant exchange sacrifice. Rook takes d4 check, pawn takes, king takes. And I think I could have saved the game. Rook f4, bishop e2, rook f8, king e3, rook c8. And now I'm probably lost. The only chance would have been in this position if I go back with rook f4 and I put my rook on h4. If I had just left my rook on h4, I'm not 100% certain. If I just left my rook on f4, h4, f4, h4, I'm not 100% certain that white can win. But I didn't have a lot of faith in this kind of passive defense where I'm just shuffling my rook back and forth from f4 to h4. So instead, I tried to shift sides to get my rook active, but he's too fast unraveling these pawns, and suddenly he has 3 connected passed pawns. This is a winning position. I get 1 pawn, and I get a passed pawn, but it's too slow. e5 check. I can't imagine that this position is really salvageable for black. It looks too powerful, these 3 connected passed pawns. If we give the computer engine enough time here, I think the longer we let it analyze, apparently I had king d5. This would have been best. This might have been a miracle draw, like king d5, staying active. I was, of course, afraid of bishop f3 check, but that actually interferes. So I don't know. Maybe there's some hope. Or king c7, but king e7 was probably it's all losing, you know, but I don't know. King e5 a little more active. f4 now. What a beautiful ending, really, for Fresh Kid here. He has these 3 connected passed pawns. I cannot save the game. Check, king e4. Just for spite, I take the second pawn. These pawns are useless. Now black is totally lost. d5, h5. You know, 2 connected passed pawns, I could sack a rook, but I can't sack a rook for 3 connected passed pawns. So in a couple moves, I resigned here. Bishop e5 checks, resigns. So that's it, guys. 4 interesting games for my Sunday Simul. I want to thank Fresh Kid, Narathos, Andrea, and Pilot 100 for playing in the Simul. As I do thank everybody for playing in my Sunday Simul on lichess every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. CET. I'm International Master William Paschall, and don't forget to like and subscribe here on my channel. We will have more videos coming your way over the future coming weeks. And again, please check out the Simul. I do weekday streams, Blitz and Classical Chess, and lichess as well. You can check those out. I do upload them here to the channel. Again, International Master William Paschall, thank you, and if you can at all, support the channel. Again, at least like and subscribe, and if you can help support us via PayPal, I appreciate that as well. If you can support us just by watching my live streams, please do so. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.